I do, as a humanist, believe that the concept unborn child is a real one, and I think the concept is underlined by all the recent findings of embryology, by the early viability of a well-conceived human baby, one that isn't going to be critically deformed, or even some that are, will be able to survive outside the womb earlier and earlier and earlier. And I see that date only being pushed back, and I feel a responsibility to consider the occupant of the womb as a candidate member of society in the future, and thus to say that it cannot be only the responsibility of the woman to decide upon it, that it's a social question and an ethical and a moral one. And I say this as someone who has no supernatural belief. So your question ought to have been this: how do I have any ethical opinions, since I don't believe that I'm created, and I don't believe I'm going to heaven?
I prefer the first question, if you don't mind.
Right, but okay, but I mean, it just isn't it entailed by it? I appeal to the audience. Have I not answered the question about the termination of pregnancy? Which bit have I not answered? You better prompt me then.
I'll read it again. Why is it that, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely?
Well, it isn't according to me. I don't say God does that.
Nature does. In your book, which is right over here, you have an entire chapter about the atrocities in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And the atrocities have to do with God commanding genocide and those things. And you obviously have a problem with that, as many people should. So my question again is, why, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely in the Old Testament, is it a moral outrage, but when you play God by taking a life prematurely through an abortion, it is a moral right?
But once again, I'm sorry if my work is so obscure, but I don't say that I have a moral right to terminate a pregnancy. I've given all the reasons that I think hedge that question ethically and morally very sternly, very stringently. And in any case, it's not like saying that every living child of the Amalekites should be destroyed. And an injunction by God to Moses to say he's been too merciful and he's spared too many children and enslaved too few women and didn't make the genocide complete. I'm sorry, I've never been accused of, and I expect not to be, if I'm lucky enough in my life, of any such thing. And the idea that there's a moral equivalence between the two, or handling the really difficult question of an unviable fetus and what should be done about it, isn't a moral equivalence at all.
So do you want to say that all unborn life is, like you say in the book, is a human being, and therefore you should not kill it? Is that what you want to say to get out of this dilemma, or what do you want to say?
No, but I think the presumption, I've long said that the presumption is that the unborn entity has a right on its side, and that every effort should be made to see if it can be preserved. And I think that's an ethical imperative. What I do say in the book is I think the Roman Catholic Church makes this argument immoral when it could be a moral one, by saying that contraception is not to be allowed, by saying that contraception is the moral equivalent of abortion. In other words, to say that contraception is also murder, which is a nonsensical and disproportionate position. I quote some serious Catholics in my book. William F. Buckley, the late, is one. Clare Boothe Luce is another, by saying if the Church says that contraception and abortion are morally the same, it degrades the opposition to abortion morally. And by making absurd arguments, as it has in the past, Aquinas believed that every single sperm contained a microembryo inside it, and thus that, if you like, I hope I don't offend anyone, hand jobs are genocide. As for blowjobs, don't start. That an ectopic pregnancy, in other words, a direct threat to the life of the mother, a fallopian tube pregnancy, is, instead of a direct threat to the life of the mother and an obvious no-starter for a human embryo, because that's going anyway, is someone who should be allowed to vote. This is nonsense. It's casuistry, it's immoral, it's superstition, and it prevents people from thinking seriously about matters that humanism can decide for itself, for heaven's sake, without any supernatural intervention.
Your question.